Our application is reaching a good stage. We are now able to reach to a set of emails with all of the respective folders they belong to. In this lesson, we'll begin another chapter. We're going to send an actual email. We're going to use the SMTP protocol this time, and I'm going to show you how you can use it. There are two stages at sending an email. The first one actually sends the email, and the other one creates a copy of that email back into your sent folder. We've known before that our folder is called inbox.sent. That's where all of the sent messages are stored. This first lesson will focus on actually sending an email. We're going to use the SMTP protocol. So for that purpose, I'm going to go to the services folder and create a sendemail.rb file. This file will contain our service, so I'll just define the courier module and inside the send email class. So let's close it right away. The reason I'm not going to write a test as of now is because I want to assert that the email copy is stored in the sent messages folder. That is going to be for another lesson, so let's just focus on the actual email sending class. Okay, let's define an initialize method because I want to store credentials and stuff like that in order to connect to the SMTP server. So I'll create an SMTP server variable, which is going to be the result of courier SMTP server. Next, I'll store the user and password. So user and password. And for now, I'm just going to use the courier user and password because they are the same. The SMTP is just different. So these are the ones we'll use. We're also going to need to store the sent folder, which is going to be inbox.sent. This is just so we don't type in a string directly into the code. Next, I'm going to call the execute method, which will properly send the email. We're going to need to connect to the server, then we're going to need to fill in the data, and finally, we're going to send it. So this is the logical workflow of our feature. We'll need to connect to the server, fill the data, which matches the process of actually building the message, and then send it. So let's do that. Let's define the connect method, the fill data, and the send method. All of these are going to be private, so let me just define the private keyword in here. After sending the email, I'm going to show you the actual message being sent. I'll open the browser with the email service, and you're going to see that very message. So let's just fill the connect method. We are going to need an SMTP connection. I'll store it in an instance variable. It is going to be the instance of SMTP. We use the new command, and we'll need to pass in the actual SMTP server, much like net-IMAP. Next, we'll need to go to the SMTP object and call the start method. The start method allows you to log in to that server. We have only referenced the server, but we still need to pass in the user and password. So the start method requires the actual server again. Next, we'll pass in the user and password. And finally, as an extra parameter, we use the login method. The SMTP protocol supports more than one authentication service. So I'll just pass in the login method as you normally would do. After connecting, we'll need to instantiate a new message variable. It is going to be a string with the following format, and I'm going to show you why it is built like so. According to the SMTP protocol specification, you require a message that has this format. All of the headers for that email will come one after the other, like you see here, and then the body is separated between two new lines. All it means is you should have a blank line between the headers and the actual body. Okay, let's move on with our example. You can see the detail of having an email variable here. Well, that's because we'll need to have some sort of data to send. We'll need to specify from who it is. We'll need to specify the actual recipients, the subject, the date it was sent as well, and the message's ID. So for that purpose, I'm going to the initialize method and provide email data. This will be a hash that we'll prepare in order to have a new email object. We want to use our own abstractions so we don't depend on anything other than an email class. So I'm going to create a new setup email and pass in that data, so email data. And that way we'll create our own email object. The email object will be accessed through an ATTR reader, so email like so. This will allow us to do exactly as you see here, access the email directly from the message and not the instance variable. Let me create that really quick. I'll just put it on top. So setup email and pass in the email data. The email data will consist of something like this. It will have already some information, the from address, then the to address, which is going to be an array. Then it will have a subject, which will ask for it. And finally, it will have a body. Actually, the from attribute shouldn't be there. After all, the person that's sending the email is right in line 6. This is our email address, which we'll use when building the email. So we're going to expect this kind of structure, and we're going to need to merge it with something else. So email data.merge, and we'll pass in a hash. The amount of information that is missing from this email data is whoever's sending the email, the message ID, and the timestamp. So we'll complement the hash with from, and for that purpose, I'm just going to include a user. After all, that's the email that's being provided as the entity that's sending the email. The next step is to provide a sent at, and I'm just going to pass in time.now. Ideally, we should provide this right before sending the actual email. But since we're not going to deal with microsecond management, I'm just going to include that value as of this position. The next field that's missing is the message's ID. The message ID has a similar mechanism to GET for that matter. It contains a unique identifier which should resemble very closely the contents of that email. So instead of passing the message ID, I'm going to do something else. First, I'm going to instantiate that email, which is going to be email.new, and I'll just pass email data. We'll pass the recipients, the subject, the body, whoever's sending the email, and the actual timestamp. Let's just make sure that the email constructor gets all of this data. We get to, from, sent at, subject, and body. It seems everything is in there. Okay, the last thing that I need to do is to go to the email and call the set message ID. This will not be part of the constructor because I believe it's not supposed to. It's a separate task. So I'll call that method on the email and I'll define it right below the initialize method. So set message ID here, and I'm going to pass in a message ID operator here. This variable will be the result of digesting the contents of our email. It's up to you to define the digest mechanism, so I'm going to use digest SHA-1.hexDigest. This method allows you to pass in a string with any content, and it will digest it into a large string. So in here, what I'll do is I'll just instantiate an array, and I'll pass in to.join, then I'll pass in, for example, the timestamp and the body. Let's also include the subject, just to be very sure. I'm going to join all of these by an empty string. Digesting this whole string will result in a 32-character long string, which will be unique because we have the timestamp and everything. If we had two different emails with the same recipients, body and subject, the timestamp would mandatorily be different. So this acts as a salt if you want to. So this will be the unique identifier. Let's also not forget to pass in a symbol into the ATTR reader. This will make the attribute readable from the outside. Okay, so now we get the email's message ID and remaining data into its own email object. Now we need to actually fill the data, which we already have here. We have the from attribute, the to attribute, which would be an array joined by different commas. We get the subject, sent at, and message ID. The body is also present, so all we need to do is we need to actually send the email. That's going to be part of the send method. In the send method, all you need to do is this. You'll need to pass in send message, which will send this very message, and you will need to specify who is going to send it and who it is sending to. And finally, you call the finish method. One thing we should mention is that this should be an instance variable, so let me just fix that really quick. The email is already available, so this should be good to go. The 3 steps are complete. We connect to the server, as you can see in the connect method. Let me just push this to the middle. We create a new instance of SMTP, pass in the server, then we call the start method by passing in the login credentials, and that's it for connecting. Next, we need to fill the data, which I'll show you right now. We are just assigning the value of message into the contents of this here doc. This body is standard in the SMTP protocol. Finally, we hit the send method, which will actually send the message and finish it off. So this should be good to go. This is a standard procedure for actually sending an email. I would like to test this out, but as I've mentioned, I'm going to use a testing technique in the next lesson. We're going to learn how to store a copy of this email into the sent folder. We are going to use this very instance variable called email, and we'll pass it around a new service that will actually store its copy into one specific folder. Only then we'll be able to test this out. So join me in the next lesson. See you soon.